Hi, welcome for another episode of Peaceful Passages with Theresa Bates and my beautiful co-host, Sierra Onstate.
Hello, Miss Theresa.
Hi there.
What are we discussing on this session?
Well, today some of the topics I want to talk about is some of the differences of home funerals compared to using a funeral home.
It's a good distinction. It'd be good to know what the differences are.
Yeah. Well, a lot of times in our society, we're so used to when a death does occur to call the funeral home and have them take care of the deceased, and we show up for a funeral.
Because that's the societal expectation that's been already set out. But there's other options, aren't there?
There's quite a few other options. Well, it's not that it's wrong, and if people want to use funeral homes, I have nothing against people using funeral homes.
Personal preference.
And it's interesting that you go back, I'd say 200 years, a little bit of 100, maybe not too much. Yeah, maybe 100.
Around Civil War. Yeah.
Right. When a death occurs, most of the time the people would take care of the family member or the loved one at home, and they'd have the funeral in their house, and they would, on a horse-drawn carriage, would have the casket. The coffin in the back, in the back of the wagon, and the funeral procession would proceed from there. But times have changed a little bit over the years.
Immensely.
It's changed a lot.
It's been taken out of the home and becomes more industrialized and a little bit less personal, I would say.
Right. It's a little bit more standoffish, and we've gotten away from working with death and dying, and it's, I don't want to quite say sanitized.
A little bit,
but
yeah.
It's
there's
very
distance.
Right. There's a lot of distance between family members and the dying process with hospitals, and everything's being put in compartments and specialized. But one of the topics we're talking a little bit during our break about embalming, and I know that's not necessarily specific to a funeral home or a home funeral, but I wanted to talk just a little bit about embalming. With embalming started, really got its foothold during the Civil War, because there were so many of our soldiers, male and female, that would die on the battlefield.
And then trying to transport them back home so that they could have a proper viewing and all of that. Right.
Yeah. And the process back then was a lot different than the process now. One of the stories that I heard is they would use, back then whiskey was fairly cheap, so they try to use whiskey, anything that would preserve the body from the battlefield, so that way
for identification purposes and such.
Well, identification, but it was more of for the soldier to be able to be transported back to their family, because back then they had horses and trains. They didn't have too many cars. Yeah. So that's really when embalming got started.
And also the modern funeral industry as well, too. Because before that, as you said before, is all family in the community who were supporting people.
Right. And when it happened in the community, death generally did happen, or the burial did happen relatively fast, because there is no way to keep the body from decomposing quickly, or just slow down the decomposition process back then. So with embalming, one of the main reasons why they do that is when you're at a funeral home, they ask if you want to do a viewing.
Or a closed casket.
Right, or a closed casket. Most of the time when they ask and you say, yes, I want a viewing, that's almost always permission to embalm.
Unless stated otherwise.
Right, and you have to be very specific, because there's a lot of funeral homes that will not allow you to view the loved one unless they've been embalmed. I remember recently we did a tahara, cleaning the deceased in a funeral home, but we had to sign papers saying that they're not embalmed. Yeah. Because we've been so far removed from what death actually looks like, not just the TV, but the reality behind the scenes on what death looks like. And the funeral homes are now having us sign papers, so that way if we see anything that doesn't look normal,
Yeah.
then they're covered. But if you still want to do a viewing without embalming, you can push it a little bit. If it's extremely important for you to do that, and that funeral home doesn't allow that, then you can leave the deceased there and do a little bit more research. This is some of the things when we talked previously in one of our previous episodes about having things in writing and doing things ahead of time. This is one of those questions to ask.
Yeah.
Because if you want to have a viewing without embalming, because some funeral homes will allow it and some won't, and you want to find out beforehand.
Yeah, so then you're not having all that confusion and time wasted, and so.
Right, yeah. And then you'd have to, if you want to move them, then you'd have the transportation, extra charges for that. It's possible, but just be aware that would happen. But with the embalming, with what we teach, with trying to help the deceased to be in the ground as soon as possible, then we don't promote embalming.
True.
But we don't.
A more natural way of doing things.
Right, because we want the body to go back to the natural state as fast as possible, but as respectfully, without chemical intervention, if possible.
Great.
Yeah. So covering different topics, so I want to cover having using a funeral home, and then the second half of this session we'll cover a home funeral. So at the beginning, do you know, Sierra, what some of the different options on why you would choose a particular funeral home?
Well, for one, like whether it's cultural or spiritually based, like would you want to use more of a religiously based funeral home? Like what are their accoutrements that they have for services and that sort of thing? And then also the price difference as far as your financial standing. Location, what's going to be the most convenient for all of your guests to come to a service? And also the distance from where the person is going to be buried and that sort of thing, because there's transportation costs and that sort of thing. And just how you want the service to be done, and if you you want to shop around a little bit, because there's a lot of different funeral homes who have different price points and they have different service options, and just kind of talk to maybe some staff and see do you think you guys would work well together and that sort of thing. And you can read, even just go online and read the reviews and be like, I had a great experience, or these people were terrible, just like anything else. Right.
Well, every funeral home has to have what they call a GPL, and it's their general price list.
Yeah.
So, and the law requires the funeral homes to have them, to present them. But if you're price shopping for a funeral home, one of the things that and I would say respectfully ask, is if you know somebody that maybe your friend used the funeral home, then if you're comfortable with them, you can ask to see the bill. Because sometimes on the general price list, there's sometimes the prices for a funeral can get very expensive very quickly.
There's a lot of add-ons, and they'll try to upsell you, and it's like, do you really want this?
Right. And because they are in business, they have a right to charge certain things. They are there 24/7 for people. So there is a lot of blessings with using the funeral home.
But you also want to be wise and careful on how you proceed with that.
Right. So if you have the opportunity to be able to do things before a death occurs, then you can shop around a little bit, walk in the funeral home, talk to the funeral director and the staff to see if it's a good fit for you. And generally, because when a death occurs, they have staff that would come pick up the deceased and transport and take care of them. They would be in refrigeration. They dress and they care for the body. And the majority of the funeral homes that I've been in throughout the country, the people are absolutely very respectful. They want to do anything and everything they can to serve the family, to bring peace. I've heard there are stories out there about the challenging ones. There's one of the ladies I listen to is the naughty funeral directors, and they are out there, but they're very, very, very few.
They are, yeah.
Because the majority of them, 95% of them, are very respectful. And using a funeral home and following what we've done as a society is, you know, it is a blessing. But also following some of the protocols that we do with, you know, doing the Tahara, where we have our community come in and take care of the body. There's funeral homes that will allow us to go back and use the facility and do the washing of the deceased ourselves. And it's not better or worse, it's just a different protocol.
Yeah.
I know when I die, I want my sisters in Messiah to come and care for me and take care of me, to wash me, because they'll wash me, they will pray over me, they will anoint me, they will say prayer, right?
Yeah.
They will do all that, and I want my sisters to be able to do that
instead of some stranger you've never met before.
Right.
It's a,
right.
Yeah.
And
It's assuring.
right, and again, the people that work in funeral homes are very, very respectful.
They are, yeah, but
But
still,
it's just my preference is I
Yeah.
want somebody that
you want a personal
that
experience.
is right, that is very God-driven and God-orientated to be able to do this for me. And that's one of the things that we do. And a lot of funeral homes are starting to allow us to come in to do that.
Which is wonderful, yeah.
Even after COVID.
Yeah.
I know COVID has changed a lot of the different protocols and things like that. And if you have questions about different requirements for funeral homes, if we utilize for a Tahara, you know, get a hold of me, and
She can walk you through the process.
right, I can walk you through the process, but also on my website and in my email, contact me that way, because there is, the list is too long and this time frame is too short to talk about all the different things to look for. But you know, utilizing and building that relationship with a funeral home is really important, because they are a huge asset in our
Truly.
community.
Yes. So as far as Tahara, can you walk us through what that looks like and what you do?
Well, the Tahara process itself is we have, it's basically we take care of the deceased, the men take care of the men, women take care of the women, men never take care of the women, but if there are no men available, women can take care of the men. It's a respect, it's modesty for the body, modesty for what, who God has created that particular person to be.
Yeah.
And we go through, we do the washing, we dress, we do a water pouring ceremony, which would represent like a baptism or a mikveh. And sometimes we sing songs, a lot of times we pray. And we'll dress the deceased and put them in the casket. I train people to be able to do that. So if there's a death in community, that community can take care of their own.
Which is a wonderful thing.
Right,
Yeah.
it's a very beautiful thing. So we can do that in the funeral home and at home as well.
Very good.
Yeah. So, excuse me. One of the other options that people might not be aware of is a home funeral legal? Is that one of the options that's out there? And people don't know that it's an option.
It definitely is. And again, it kind of depends on what state you're in and what's going on, like legally and that sort of thing. Rules vary, so you want to research your options and where you're located, and it can be different in your different state, your county, like all the different things. And so just being aware of what you're allowed to do, and there may not even be laws on the books about it. So like getting into legislation and contacting your senators and being like, is this a thing? And can we turn this into a law that it's applicable so that people can do this if they want to? And with home funerals, it's such a personable experience, and you can customize it to the person that has passed away. Like if they wanted to like have a celebration of life rather than a dreary, sad funeral, you could have a band playing, or you could have people bring their favorite flowers, or just different traditions or rituals and different ways to show respect that is very tailored to that family and that person.
Right. one of the things that I saw that I thought was kind of neat is, and I don't know what state it is, but some of the states will allow, and there's a very specific cardboard box that people
Yeah.
can be buried in. It's not one that you get at Walmart.
No, it's
But
good option.
but it's a cardboard box, and sometimes at a home funeral, they know the death is coming, and they have that cardboard box there, and they let their grandkids decorate it. People write on it.
Yeah.
They draw, they paint, they do any things to make that special just for their loved one.
Exactly.
And
And
I
they do
thought-
the same thing before cremation. They have those cardboard boxes, and you can use it for the same process.
Right, and that basically is what that cardboard box is a cremation container. So, and most funeral homes would have them. And I wanted to touch base a little bit when you're talking your legislation. Is it legal in your state or not? Some of us are very tech savvy, and you can do research online with the particular state that you live in to find out if it's legal or not.
Yeah.
Other people, I'm learning how to navigate those particular things.
Well, you can go to your public library or your
Right.
county office or whatever it may.
Or even talk to a funeral director.
They would be
Go,
knowledgeable.
go there. You can call them or have a face-to-face conversation with them. They really are there to try to support what the family wants, what the family needs. So find out the legality in the state. One of the best resources, because a lot of people think home funerals, green burials is just a new trend.
Yeah, but no, we've been doing
But
this for
it's
thousands of
right,
years. It's only
thousands
recently.
of years.
Yeah.
But here in the United States, I can't say specifically when they started. I know they've been a driving force, but it's the Home Funeral Alliance, and they've been out having their website and been a really great presence
They're a
for
great
about
resource.
about 15 years.
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about it or wanting more information, I know the Home Funeral Alliance. You can find them online. They are a wealth of information about what you can do, can't do, and things like that.
Exactly.
So when you have a death at home, it's a really easy and blessed transition to go from the death to the funeral, our home funeral, and again, having everything done in writing, having things prepared ahead of time on what you need and the paperwork you have to have ahead of time. And if you have the home funeral, you can say date, time, things like that.
Oh yeah.
One way that I know to help slow down the decomposition aspect of the deceased is what I've been trained in is to go to Walmart or your closest grocery store, do a little bit of footwork before you're driving everywhere,
Yeah.
and find the store that sells dry ice. Because if you can get a couple blocks of dry ice,
It'll
you can
keep the
put
body
it,
cool.
Right. You put it in between washcloths because you still, even though the deceased is deceased, you still don't want the dry ice
To
touching
come
the
in
skin.
contact. Yeah.
So you put it under both of the shoulder blades and underneath the hips, and it just slows the process. The ice does melt, but you can be able to have the deceased there in your home without too many issues, and I'll respectfully leave it there. Up to 3 days, actually.
Which is
You know.
wonderful because then you can have people come and do visitation. You can
Right.
have people come and have, a meal together and a celebration of life, and it can be
Right.
a little bit of a longer
Right.
celebration.
Right, and you can spend time together as a family, recall all of the events that they've done in their life. And with the home funeral, you have a little bit more flexibility. And this is an area that I like to run in, so to speak. You're cleaning the deceased up yourself. You're dressing them. You're doing all of that kind of stuff in a very respectful and honorable way.
Right.
But there's also things to have on hand,
that are
things
useful.
that if you can't do it inside, can you do it outside? Yes, you can. And if you do it outside, I still recommend a tent unless you're out in the middle of nowhere and nobody's going to see.
Yeah.
But one of the things is if that's something that you want to do and you want to announce it, when somebody is in transition where the death is imminent, then you want to start notifying the people.
Get preparations started.
Yeah, you don't want to wait until the death actually occurs to go, oh, guess what? Well,
You need to get da-da-da-da-da.
right.
Yeah.
So give them a little bit of heads up if you have the time and opportunity to do that. And, to set the service up, make sure there's enough places to park and, some of the logistical things.
Yeah.
But having a home funeral, the other thing to take in consideration is where they're going to be interred.
Yes.
Because you can have the home funeral,
but you still have to transport.
right? Are they going to be buried on property? Are you going to cremate them? I mean, there's still decisions to have to make. So, and if you have space at home, again, I'm not an attorney. Find out the rules in the area that you live in, the county and the state requirements of burying your deceased on the property. I know it's legal,
Yeah.
but you have to get permission. You have to get a permit. Don't do it without permission, because if you do it without permission,
There can be legal ramifications.
there
Yeah.
will be legal ramifications, because what happened to them if you sell the property and somebody wants to build a shack and they pull
Yeah.
up human remains,
Problematic.
then now you're in a criminal investigation. So you have to get the burial permit. And if you're transporting, there are some states that will allow you to get a transportation permit to transport the deceased to the place of interment. And it's a simple form. I don't think it costs a whole lot of money. I think $20, $50 if it costs
bad.
anything. But it has to be for that one specific date only.
Yeah.
But if you don't want to go through all those kind of hassles, then call the funeral director. They will charge you to pick up and transport. But sometimes that's a lot easier because that's what they do on a professional basis.
Exactly, and they have everything set up for it.
Yeah, yeah. And then if you want to, and I'll touch on this just briefly, if you want to bury on property, then there is certain criteria to have to be able to do that. You have to have some kind of fencing around it.
Make sure it's not anywhere near any water sources, so there's no contamination and that sort of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
And you have to bury them at least, I believe the rule is 18 to 20 inches of soil on top. And that was what would constitute a green burial for that. Generally, if it's under 20 inches, you don't have to go 6 feet down. And if you're hand digging a grave 6 feet down, it's
a lot of work.
it's a lot of work. Even the young men in their 20s that are very strong, if they're doing it by themselves, it's an 8-hour process.
Easily.
For that. So, but plan things like that ahead of time. But it does have to have a small fence around it. It has to be labeled off, and families can do that if they have the right space of property. Yeah. But with home funerals, there's too many requirements really to talk about in one particular session. If you have questions, I believe my email is going to be on the screen. But call, ask questions, because we want to open up the space for communities to start doing this, and to have their own cemetery, or to find different ways of caring for our families, friends, and loved ones.
Exactly.
Because the concept of letting the professional take care of them, take care of people, when we come in the home, we are still professional. We are still responsible and respectful. But there's also God is returning, renewing the ways of old, and getting back to the basics. So if there's a lot of things that happen within our community, to know how to take care of somebody in the home, whether you're just a caregiver or something were to happen and you're called to help somebody else with the death in their home.
Precisely.
Right. There's so many ways just to be respectful, and again, having things written out, know who to call, what to do, and how to do it. But home funerals are very much getting traction in the world, and people want to take care of them in the home because funeral homes, they have their blessing, absolutely. If you want to use them, use them.
But they can also have their cons.
Right, and the person being able to be in their home where they lived and be washed and cared for and fully transition from this life to the next in their home, if that's what their desire is
to be able to facilitate that as best as
right.
possible.
It is such a blessing. And there's a lot of things to have on hand, but it is well worth the time and the trouble to do that. A friend of mine took care of her mom and had everything written out. So her mom passed away Friday morning at 9 o'clock. And because she had all the paperwork and everybody else was on board, she called the cemetery opened the grave, they transported, like I said, she had everything
set and ready to be
set
in motion.
motion. So hospice nurse came out, pronounced, they transported, we did a tahara, transported from the house to the graveside, and they were buried, the grave was covered by 3 o'clock in the afternoon.
Wow.
That's rare,
but it
can happen when everything is done in order. So whether you choose to use a funeral home or do a home funeral, have those conversations with your families and loved ones, because it's your wishes, if you have them written down, to be able to
respectfully carry them out.
Right. So we want to thank you all again for joining the class or the session for Peaceful Passages with Sierra and myself, Theresa. And whatever you choose, may God bless you in everything that you're doing, and the transitions for your family and loved one and communities be very blessed. We thank you and have a great day.